I'll ask my first question. I think I might direct it at Alan at this point. So Alan, why do you think we should engage with shame? What's the importance of it?
Well, I think I'll start that by saying how excited I was to be when Michael and his group talked about the shame cards and invited me to look at them and participate in some way. And basically, because shame has been an affect, I guess, that's been avoided in psychotherapy and education and a whole range of ways. It's been seen more like a nuisance. It sort of gets in the way. It diminishes us. It just brings us down. People are frightened of shame. And I was just delighted to see a project that brings shame out in the open and invites us to step into it and make some sense of it and work with it. It's a primary social affect. It's grounded in the body. It's up there with sadness, anger, love, all of the other affects. And in fact, it's really essential for a social world to actually work and progress, to establish a sense of belonging, connection, for affect regulation from infants right through to adults. Without shame, we just couldn't establish boundaries in relationships. We couldn't set limits. Shame actually might be seen as a kind of pervasive attunement to the social world, where we're connected to the feelings and experiences of other people. You know, it's a world where we're desperate to fit, but sometimes feel we can't fit. Shame, it kind of moves us. It shocks us. It stops us in our tracks at times and invites us to attune to the people that we're around, the others in the world. In a sense, I suppose it could be regarded sometimes as this pain-bewildered realization of what it means to perhaps wrong someone. You know, we experience shame and we think, my God, what have I done? How could I have done that? That moves us viscerally. It forces us to see, to reflect. At times it undoes us, but it teaches us about our relationships and attunes us to our relationships with others. So to bring it out, to out shame, to bring it out there in the open and engage with it, I'm incredibly excited about this opportunity.
Yep. Thank you. I'll ask the next question to Michael. So why develop cards to address shame? How can they help?
Yeah, so the cards are made on purpose to help people ground in shame. As Alan was talking about, shame can be pushed away and pushed to the side because it can be quite scary to explore. So let me just share with you just a bit of trauma theory on this. Let me just get my slides up. So with in polyvagal theory that's being shown now, what we can see is shame is in the frozen section. So when people are feeling shame, they can go to a frozen response and fight, flight, freeze. And so the cards have been made to help that wiggly line to keep us socially engaged, and what Scandinavian theorists would call a common third. So there's me, there's the person that's sitting across from me, and there's the thing in the middle that we're both working on in therapy. So that would be the exploring shame card, so that we can keep people grounded within their window of tolerance to then be able to explore shame, the ethics of shame, how shame has us done or undone. So it's really about working with shame. Shame, as Alan's talked about, is a primary emotion like sadness. You wouldn't, for example, push sadness away. You would invite sadness in the room and you would work with sadness, and it's the same as shame. So yeah, that's the basis of the cards and why they would help.
Okay, so I'll ask you the next question too. How do you manage safety for clients, particularly if they're in shutdown shame, having a shutdown response, if you look at your diagram again. So what if they've been blocking? Can showing them the cards kind of cause some trouble or some difficulties for clients as
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is knowing your clients, and if safety is a concern, then we can use the safety card. The safety card's been made on purpose, and it's one that can be talked about how we're going to have this conversation. We want people to have the control, because when we feel out of control, we feel unsafe and we feel like we need to shut down. So the safety card can be used and these questions can be asked. The safety card can just be used on its own. You don't have to use the questions on the back of the cards. So you could actually just talk around safety and how it is for them to actually talk about shame, the talking about the talking, as we would say. Or you can ask the questions of how can we create safety when shame is around, which I suppose is talking about the talking, and what helps you feel safe. So that connection is going to be really key. Connection to the clinician or connection to whoever you're talking about shame with is going to make them feel grounded, as well as talking about when they're leaving, what can they do outside of the session to make them feel safe.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question that I want to ask is, I'm sort of interested in that shame, perpetrators of sexual abuse and perpetrators of violence, if they're moving through addressing it, will often feel shame. But what we also know is that victims of sexual abuse and victims of violence also often hold a lot of the shame. They actually almost take on the shame. So I'm wondering how these cards might be able to address both groups in a way. And I guess it's a question to both of you, to both Michael and Alan. Yeah.
So yeah, we draw very heavily on Alan's work, his trailblazing work that he's done in this area around responsibility. So let's just go to the responsibility. And what we want to do in this card, the responsibility card, is look at the ethics that Alan was talking about whose responsibility is it? And this isn't to push blame onto somebody else or to push away shame. It's actually to ask that ethical question around whose shame is it really? Who are we working with, and who should be responsible? Because there's political structures that are in place that can make us feel shame or ashamed. For example, when someone who's caused harm doesn't take responsibility, it's that relational justice is left with the victim survivor or the person who's been harmed. And so they often are feeling shame. Now, we're not saying to victim survivors, no, you shouldn't feel shame, just shut that down. What we're wanting to do is look at the ethics, and it can be really empowering to say, well, whose shame is it really in? And get them to think outside the box a little bit. And then another question about how do we face up to responsibility, or how do we face up to this shame is really important, especially when someone's caused harm. And I'm sure Alan can talk a little bit more about that, around that. We do want someone to see them being distressed when they have caused harm and they're facing up, because the victim survivor also needs to see that too, to see that that affect is being worked through. Alan, I wasn't sure if you wanted to add a little bit more or onto that.
Yeah, I guess the thing that always strikes me about shame is that we become so frightened, and we try and get rid of it before we really understand what it's about. And this is the problem with people who have been subjected to an abuse, or who've perpetrated an abuse for that matter. We often, as workers, we can't bear to be with someone when they're experiencing shame. We want to take it away. We want to sanitize their world. We want to help them feel better in some ways. And so we see shame as the problem and a danger, when in actual fact, trying to avoid or erase shame, or not being able to be with shame, is a far bigger and far more dangerous problem. If we see shame more, it's an ethical indicator. It's saying, hey, we're not tuned in. There's a rupture between us and our social world around us. There's something amiss here. And if we don't take that message and stop and reflect, there are dangers. If we can help people be with shame, we can help people step into it and understand it. What tends to happen is that they can often then start to understand that, hey, shame can become very political. It can become weaponized. It can be used to shame, to attribute shame to people. and to diminish. And in a sense, shame can also, if we step into it, we understand those politics, it can promote protest, resistance, social change. I always like to think of, we've been through times where we've had various governments all around the world where we've had leaders who've behaved shamelessly. And we look at some of the damage that's been done, or we look at the fact that we've not stepped up, faced shame, and what needs to happen to displacement of our First Nations people. It's by facing shame, by understanding, by not stepping away from it and blaming somebody else, that we can start to understand the politics, whether they be the cultural politics we're in or the politics of grooming when someone is sexually assaulted. Once we understand those politics, we can ask that question then, hey, whose shame is this? Where does it belong? Does it fit with something I've done that is disgraceful that I need to take account of? Or is it something that's been weaponized and put onto me and attributed to me that I perhaps should resist and throw off? And I think that's where your cards can come in, as offering an opportunity to not just try and eradicate shame or dismiss it, but to step in, understand it, understand the politics of it, and take a position on it, whether it be facing up to an abusive behaviour or whether it be throwing off the attributed shame that's been mistakenly put on to someone who's been victimised.
And Anne, I was going to say, from your research, I imagine you've seen this happen when you've interviewed victim survivors too.
Yes, absolutely. And sort of a big theme that came out of my research was around intimate justice. And if you don't get intimate justice, the shame sits in the wrong areas. It comes out of family violence as well. I think you kind of mentioned it. So that we need in sibling, when it's children that have harmed each other, we need the parents to be the arbitrators of justice. But and if we don't get that to happen, somehow it just it doesn't work that well. But it actually, it works with adult people as well, in terms of, and in a way, the therapist is often that arbitrator of justice as well. So having that intimate justice as opposed to legal justice is really critical for a lot of people in these situations. Yeah.
Great.
Michael, a question from the audience, and that is, can these cards just be used by therapists only?
No, they can be used across sectors. We're obviously talking very clinically here, but they can be used in schools, for example, to educate people about shame. They can be used in different settings, educational settings, or like, doing trainings to discuss shame. They can be used in any situation where shame is being felt, and it's obviously always about knowing your group that you're working with or who you're working with and how they can work. In the booklet and with the cards, it talks through different settings and situations that you can use them in. I've shown them to different professionals. I've actually shown them to police, and they've actually said they would definitely benefit from understanding shame more, especially when it presents in when they're working with people. So it can, because shame is a primary emotion, it can be used just with people in different settings. So yeah.
And another question, what does shame look like in people?
So shame, shame is that encapsulating, coming in, cramping down, but it can also look like, and I'm sure Alan and Anne will explain this a little bit more as well. It can be denial, it can be blame, it can be minimizing behaviors, it can be justifying behaviors, it can be distracting of thinking about it. You could withdraw and not want to engage with the shame. It can be aggression and violence, and it could be self-harm. And all these are obviously, if we go back to the image that I was showing you before, all of those is the fight-flight responses, because people are trying to stop themselves engaging in shame, as in talking about it, but that not talking about it or not processing it actually leads to harmful behaviors. If we take it from sexual abuse, for example, young people who want to lose their virginity, for example, because as a tribe or a group, society, we've decided that's a really young people have decided that's a great thing to do, and we need to do that to up our social status. So when people go and do that, they might do it in a harmful way to get up in their social status to stop them feeling shame. But because they're actually doing something that's causing them shame, then they feel more shame. Does that make sense? And then they might do more of harmful behaviors, or they might become angry when you raise it with them because they feel so much shame. And so the purpose of the cards, again, is to have that conversation, as Alan's talking about, engaging and looking at the ethics and looking at responsibility to help people through shame. Shame's a great opportunity for change. It's, it can be really enlightening. So, yeah, that's that.
I wonder if I could tell a story about what shame looks like. That I was thinking of a man who'd lived with humiliation all his life and who'd behaved very abusively to his partner and his child. And his way of processing shame was trying to wish it would go away, seeing it as toxic and trying to avoid it. And so he'd blame. Blame was attributed to everyone else for anything that happened. And then something happened where he had an encounter with shame. And I was fortunate enough to experience this. As he told me the story, he was having access visits with his son. And his son had lost a precious object that he'd loaned him. And his son at the access meeting meekly approached him to apologize. And this man, we'll call him Mike, Mike said, or Mike thought, well, look, I've been really hurtful to these people. I'll try and encourage him for being honest. And so he reached out his hand to shake hands. This was his way of encouraging his son's honesty for owning up to something. And his son stepped back with a flinch when this hand came towards him. And for the first time, Mike saw his son's fear. He saw that his son, that's opposite to what he wanted, but he saw the fear, he saw the flinch. And what you saw is his body collapse, his eyes downwards. It seemed like his body wanted to fold up and just disappear. Now, he wanted to shut that off because that was a horrible experience. But then the opportunity was there to invite him to actually, look, what does that mean? What does it mean to notice that your son is scared of you? What does it mean to care about that? What does that say about what you believe in? Did anyone in your life ever stop and think about the hurt that you were feeling as a little kid? What does this mean? What is this saying about Mike that he can experience that shame? How do we help make a safe passage for him to own that and recognize that maybe that is a sign of an ethical desire for something different, that if he takes seriously and he works on, he becomes the person he may really want to be. So that's the way I witness shame when I'm working with men who have done abusive or harmful things to others they care about.
Yeah, that's a great example, Alan, especially about the body collapsing. It kind of goes hand in hand with that theory, I reckon, around, the dorsal vagal nerve coming out and, him wanting to collapse, but you engaging in that social engagement to look at that opportunity of change is amazing.
Yeah, to ask him the question, what would it say about you if you didn't feel ashamed of your son being frightened of you? What would that say? What does it mean that you are reacting to that? Yeah, that's where we see shame, the value of disgrace in this case, where it can point to something that is affectively changing in a person.
And that can be really, I've experienced that as really motivational for people when you ask that question. It's, it can just get them to think about a bit more about their values and what they want to stand up for.
Absolutely. I was just the other day went to see the film, Leah Purcell film called The Drover's Wife came out, where you have a sense from an Indigenous person's perspective of the displacement and the abuses and so on. And again, when we watch a film like that and we see rather than just read about, there's a sense of shame and disgrace that I feel that I can either think, oh, I don't want to go there, I don't want to think about that's horrible, or it can motivate me to think, hey, we do need to take action. We do need that voice to Parliament. We do need these things. It can motivate us around social change. It can motivate us around individual change with our clients.
And I was sort of thinking in terms of the cards. So quite often just in social interaction with people or therapy or meeting people in family services, whatever our program is, it's like a drip feed, like we get there a little bit, after that visit, but we don't get all the way. And then the next time we come back, they may have gone back, or we might get a little bit further. But I'm sort of thinking the advantage of the cards is that you kind of get there really quickly in a moment, and you've got time where you're sitting with the person. So you're able to grab that moment in an intense way rather than that very slow drip feed of maybe helping the person lead towards it, if that makes sense. Yeah, it just seems like the cards are such, I suppose, like a catalyst or something to sort of really make it happen quite quickly. But and then you're with that person and you can help them at that moment. Yeah.
Well, they're an anchor point, I guess, that provides. We tend to whiz through things. We tend to want to get shame out of our systems quick. It feels toxic. It feels horrible. But to have an anchor point that holds us there, that enables us to be with it, to attune our bodies in a way, to calm our breathing a bit, to sit with and to get into that middle bit that Michael was showing on his graph, where we can actually think. We can think, what's happening here? What are the politics of this? Whose shame is this? Where does it belong? Is there something I need to account for in my own behaviour? Is there something I need to throw off? Is there a social action I need to take for something new to happen? They're anchor points that can hold us in that, or help hold us in that place to be with that experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think we might have time for one more question from the floor, and it is from Helen, who is curious to hear from the panel on the distinction between guilt and shame.
Okay, so in the book we've gone two different ways, and Alan can explain more as well. But so the shame is obviously focused on sense of self. I am a bad person, whereas guilt is I did a bad thing. But this is leaning more towards the controversial, as Alan will talk about a bit more. That actually, if we just engage with shame, there's no need for cognitive concept of guilt. And what is meant by that is when harm has been caused, sometimes people will stop themselves feeling the whole shame. They will go straight towards I've done a bad thing, when we want them to feel the shame. Now, we're not saying we're going to shame them, but we want them naturally to feel the shame, because as Alan was talking about, what does it say about me that I feel this way, that I've done this bad thing? So we want the affect to come through. If the affect doesn't come through, as Anne has been talking about, is that relational justice or intimate justice gets stuck, because they're not, someone who's caused harm is not owning the whole shame or the whole responsibility. And when somebody goes into that space, it can actually cause them more shame, as in they can start to realize how bad the situation has been. Now, that's not to say that we don't do that. We obviously need to do that in a very safe way, but we want them to realize that their behavior hasn't been okay. So that's the kind of distinction, and it is again explained in the book, but I'll pass it over to Alan, because Alan might have a bit more to say about, especially just engaging in the shame and, getting away from the cognitive concept of guilt.
Well, it's interesting, Michael, because guilt can be a way of avoiding shame. Guilt can be a way of trying to step too quickly through a process where something needs to be faced. Like, for example, men I work with who've done often terribly hurtful, abusive things. They would love to jump into that position. Yes, I did a bad thing, but I'm a good person. But there's an initial reflection that, yeah, look, what I have done is shameful. I have to find a way to be with this and to process that and work through to a spot where it's through holding that and becoming tuned into the experience of the other, not leaving it for the person I've hurt to have to carry all the pain and discomfort, but being able to carry that myself, being able to wear that and getting to the point where then I can make some restitution, and maybe there's some atonement, there's a way of moving beyond that. There's an Australian philosopher, Elspeth Probyn, that says guilt is really the default position in a colonized land. You know, we kind of readily will step into cognitive things that are a bit easier to find a fit with. Shame moves behavior. Guilt seldom moves behavior. Guilt, we can sit around saying, I feel guilty about this and stewing about it. Shame, if we allow ourselves to be moved by it, actually produces revolutionary action, or can produce revolutionary action. So in a sense, I have a lot more space for productive things happening when shame is allowed to do the work that it's there to do. You know, it's not there just to bother us, it's there to point a direction, an ethical and a moral. It's there to provide some kind of moral compass, in a sense, of how we might live according to our own ethics. Guilt doesn't have the power to do that.
And I wasn't sure if you wanted to add something on to what Alan was saying, or the intimate justice space.
Sorry, I just muted. I don't think I could add anything more to what Alan just said.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably a really good spot to end, because we have gone over time. And I think this is a conversation that could continue. But I would like to thank Michael, Anne, and Ellen for a fascinating insight into shame, and for talking about the part exploring shame can play in helping reframe shame into something positive and helpful.